What's up, Packer fans? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. We officially made it. It's not quite as good as Packers opening day yet or opening game, but it is the NFL opening day, Thursday night football. Rams-Bills should be an absolutely tremendous game. Cannot wait to watch. And football is just back, and it feels great to say that. We'll have football to watch, games to break down, and it is officially NFL season. So welcome. It seems like forever since we had the Super Bowl back in February, but everything is right with the world. The NFL is back, and we have a phenomenal game to kick things off in Bills-Rams. I'm going Bills in this one, but man, I think it's going to be an incredibly tight, incredibly fun game. Not here to talk about Bills-Rams, though. We've got a ton to discuss, and I want to go over clearly the Packers and more specifically what they can do to hopefully be playing in February this upcoming season. But before I get there, I mentioned that I'm going to be having some big announcements coming up. Well, I have three of them that are official. I've got one yet pending, but the first three announcements that I'm super excited to announce here as well, I announced them on Twitter yesterday, but for those who didn't see it, if you're not familiar with Tyler Herrick, Tyler does phenomenal social media work for Cheesehead TV, amongst other companies. And he is going to be officially joining the Pack a Day podcast team, helping with social media on Twitter, potentially doing some YouTube shorts, potentially doing some TikToks, maybe some Instagram and Facebook shorts and things like that as well. But have him joining this season, which is going to be a huge get for the Pack a Day podcast, and working with Tyler. Could not be more excited for that. So that is announcement number one. Announcement number two is Mike Wall will be back this season. I know I got a ton, and I mean a ton of feedback of people really enjoying Mike's episodes. So he will be back this year, and he will be on every Friday is the plan right now. So Mike and I will record on Thursdays, and the episode will be live 5 a.m. on Fridays starting next week. And then the third and final announcement for now, I have one yet to go, but the third and final is that I will be hosting a weekly live YouTube show right here on YouTube, 4:30 p.m. Central Time, Lambeau time, every Friday. And it'll be a happy hour. People will be able to ask questions. It's just going to be very casual. I'll probably be drinking a beer. Should just be really fun. And I'm going to have guests from around the Packer sphere, including from the Pack a Day podcast. So my first three guests joining me this Friday, 4:30 Central, will be Dusty Evely, Maggie Loney, and Perry Goldstein. So super excited for that. And like I said, I have one big announcement still pending. So stay tuned for that as well. As far as Packers news and updates, we got our first injury report of the year, and overall, relatively clean, all things considered. Allen Lazard still did not practice, so that is definitely a concern. We learned that it's an ankle injury. We also learned from Matt LaFleur in his press conference that he was stepped on a week ago in practice, which led to the injury. So no news yet. We'll get a update on Thursday as to whether or not this is actually, I don't even remember if it's Thursday or Friday anymore. They've changed the injury designation so many times. I think it's Friday. We'll learn if he's questionable, doubtful, out, etc. But he did not practice on Wednesday, which is noteworthy, and we're going to have to keep an eye on that injury moving forward. In addition, David Bakhtiari, Elton Jenkins, Darnell Savage, and Robert Tonyan were all listed as limited participants in practice. Hopefully that still means that they're good to go for this week, but until we get full injury designations, we'll just have to see what those ultimately would be. My guess is we're going to get a lot of questionables here. I think probably Lazard, Bakhtiari, Jenkins, all questionable. Maybe Savage and Tonyan aren't, but I'm guessing that we're going to get a lot of questionables out of this group. All right, let's get to our main topic for today. I've discussed similar topics to this in the past, but this is an episode I did a year ago, and I wanted to re-up it again this year. And that is ultimately the keys to the Packers winning a Super Bowl this year. And I've seemingly fixated on the number 12 lately on these lists, but I have 12 keys to the Packers' success this season and them ultimately winning the Super Bowl. So some of these are low-hanging fruit. We'll go over those a little bit quicker, and then I'll go in depth in the other ones. But number one, the easiest, simplest, most low-hanging fruit is injuries. And I've mentioned this before, and I'll say it again. There are going to be teams that just ultimately get snake bit throughout the course of the season. And Green Bay has to avoid being one of those teams. And if they are the one that gets injured, or they have injuries to Rashawn Gary or Aaron Rodgers or Jair Alexander, David Bakhtiari, Elton Jenkins, and just their key personnel, it's just going to be really difficult to win. And that goes for any team. You take away their key players, it's insanely, hard. It's hard when you are completely healthy to win in this league. It's even harder if you don't have your key guys that you're paying a ton of money to go out and win football games. So Green Bay's going to have to stay healthy. That goes for just about every team. We've seen teams overcome injuries. Certainly the Eagles losing Carson Wentz when he was in the midst of an MVP season. You've had the Packers when they had like 20 guys on IR when they won it in 2010, and then had Charles Woodson go down in the Super Bowl itself. So there's ways to overcome it, but man, the season is a war of attrition, and the healthier you can stay, the better odds that you have of actually winning a Super Bowl. Number two, and I've talked about this one before as well, is the state of the offensive line. And that goes sort of hand in hand with injuries, and David Bakhtiari and Elton Jenkins. I think those two, are beyond keys to this upcoming season, but it goes above and beyond that as well. I think Josh Myers needs to take a jump, and it looks like he seems ready to do so. I think John Runyon Jr. can still even get better, and I think he can improve and become a real just stalwart amongst this offensive line and be a long-term starter at that left guard position. And then even guys like Royce Newman, I think there is opportunity for him to improve, or maybe it's Jake Hansen, or maybe it ends up being Zach Tom. But I legitimately believe that if they go Bakhtiari, Runyon, Myers, and I would love Zach Tom at that right guard spot, and then ultimately Elton Jenkins at right tackle, I think that has the opportunity to be one of the best offensive lines in the league, assuming Elton Jenkins looks and feels like Elton Jenkins, and David Bakhtiari looks and feels like David Bakhtiari. If there are setbacks to Jenkins or Bakhtiari, or they don't figure out that right guard spot, and Newman and Hansen and Tom and Ryan and anyone else just isn't really able to fill that spot adequately. Josh Myers doesn't take a step. John Runyon Jr. doesn't take a step. Now there's a lot more complications, and I think this offensive line is probably very similar to what they had a season ago. And I think that's a problem. I don't think with no Devontae Adams and his ability to win off the line of scrimmage and uncover so easily, I think a poor offensive line is a recipe for disaster. Green Bay needs a better running game. They need more explosive runs, and that starts with the offensive line. That needs to set up play action. That play action needs to set up explosive plays down the field, and they need to be better in the red zone too, and that starts with the offensive line as well. So number one is injuries, but number two is some of those injuries along the offensive line with Bakhtiari and Jenkins, but the overall health and the overall improvement of that unit, because they have the ability to be really freaking good on the offensive line. With injuries, they have the ability to be really freaking bad. So that is going to be a very massive key to the Packers and their postseason success this year. Number three, developing a playmaker. I go back to the 2010 Super Bowl, and I think of that play to Greg Jennings, right? The play over the middle to extend their offensive drive and to put more pressure on the Steelers. And I just feel like there are points in the season, specifically in the playoffs, where you've got to have somebody that you can count on, third and long or game on the line, down 6, and you need a drive. Like, you're going to have to throw the football. And remember, a couple of those, late game heroics where Devontae Adams catches huge passes over the middle of the field. They need somebody to step up in that capacity. That's one situation. But the other is that, we've went over this before, but the offense was such a grind a season ago. There were so many 12-play, 75-yard drives. And they have Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, and they are a team that takes tremendous care of the football and very much limits mental mistakes along the offensive line with holding penalties and those sort of things. This is a team that doesn't fumble a ton. They're very sound and efficient when it comes to those things. But at some point, you just got to make life easier on yourself, and you got to find ways to hit some of those explosives, or just get the ball in a guy's hands and let him do the heavy lifting and create some explosive plays on his own. I think Aaron Jones can do that. I think Christian Watson can do that. I think Romeo Doubs has the ability to do that. But that's two rookies and a running back that's very, dependent upon that offensive line ahead of him to generate those explosive plays. I think Jones can get involved in the passing game too, so it's not just in the running game, but it certainly helps if he can get those in the running game. So I think they've got to develop explosive plays and develop a playmaker. And I really think if we're breaking this down further, this comes down to Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs. Doesn't have to be both, but one of those guys has to be a real legitimate deep threat / playmaker. I think Watson has the ability to be a guy that gets the ball in his hands and can take it the distance at any given moment. They haven't had very many of those guys. I don't think Watkins is that guy. Lazard's not that guy. Cobb's not that guy anymore. I think AJ Dillon can create some explosives, but that's not the bread and butter of his game. I don't think they have a tight end that's going to be an explosive playmaker. So it really is going to come down to some youth in Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs. And I think they have to become, explosive playmakers as the course of this season goes along. Number 4, I have preached all off season long. They're going to be a playoff team. They just need to find a way to peak at the right time, clearly in January and February, and play their best football. And I'm actually going to combine this because I have this one later as well. Number 11 on my list was the next evolution from Matt LaFleur. And what I meant by that is Matt LaFleur is a very good coach. He's got a very good philosophy. He's got a very good offense. He's a very good play caller. He's, in my opinion, a real, the total package at head coach. He can do everything. He has a great pulse on this team, but he needs to take that next step. And there was a great article of him shadowing the Milwaukee Bucks recently and trying to pick their brain on how they got over the hump. There's a next step. There is an evolution for Matt LaFleur. And it takes time in the NFL to sort of learn that of how you get to the promised land and overcome being just a good regular season team and being a championship caliber team where you're hoisting the Lombardi at the end. So combining these two, they need to play better at peak times, and Matt LaFleur needs to evolve into that coach who gets his team ready to play at the right time. And I think the big thing here is the way that I've seen this is Green Bay has been a very good regular season team, and they've gotten to the playoffs, and they've basically, not totally, but they've basically depended on what they did well in the regular season to try to win them playoff games in the playoffs. There was no evolution. There was no next step. There was no next level to get to. It was like they were doing everything they could to get wins in the regular season. And then when they needed to take the next step, they were like, we've already exhausted everything. We've done everything that we could to win in the regular season. And now we're sort of out of ideas and we don't have anything new to bring to the table. You've got to play your best football, and you need to take another step come playoff time. You need to be more creative. You need to be, at your peak from a personnel standpoint, from a scheme standpoint, from finding flaws in the opponent. And I think Matt LaFleur is going to get there this year. I really do. I think he's going to be able to, take advantage of opponents' weaknesses better than he ever has before. I do think there will be an evolution from Matt LaFleur. I do think they'll play better in January and February because I think they'll be a more defensive football team, and I think they're going to be better on special teams as well. And I think Aaron Rodgers is going to find a way to play better in the playoffs also. So, but those are the things that have to happen legitimately. So number 4 on my list, again, playing better in January and February / peaking at the right time. And then number 11, just sort of that evolution come playoff time and Matt LaFleur getting his team over the hump at that time. Number 5, gone over this a million times, just a respectable special teams, just not awful. That's all we can ask for at this point. We will all take it. I would love if they were better. Give me a top 15. I will, I don't even know what I will do. But man, if they could be even just respectable on special teams, it would be a huge win for Rich Bisaccia and company, and it'll make them that much more potent come playoff time. And they just have to find a way to do that, because if they don't, it's going to make things so much harder on this defensive-oriented team, and they just are going to really have to put their defense in good positions to succeed. So teams have to go 80 yards against this very stout, very talented Packers defense. Number 6, there are 4 players, in my opinion, that need to have bounce-back seasons who we have seen have really good seasons in the past. One caveat there. But that's Darnell Savage, Mason Crosby, Robert Tonyan, and Jonathan Garvin. So Savage, awesome 2020, struggled in 2021. Mason Crosby, awesome for a vast majority of his career, and certainly the few years preceding last year, had a really bad last season. Robert Tonyan, phenomenal in 2020, struggled in 2021 even prior to the injury, and then of course is now coming off his injury. Jonathan Garvin, the slight caveat here, we never saw him play really well, but there were flashes in his rookie season, even in very limited playing time, that, okay, there could be something there. Last year, I thought he really struggled. He looked better in training camp this year, but they need him to show those same flashes in 2020 and not struggle like he did in 2021. So bounce back seasons from Savage, Crosby, Tonyan, and Garvin. And then there are 4 players who had very strong seasons a year ago, who we've also seen play very poorly in the NFL. And that includes Preston Smith, who had a very bad 2020 before having a very good 2021. Dean Lowry, who had like a bad 2019 and 2020 before having a very good 2021. Devondre Campbell, who was completely mediocre through the course of his career before a all-pro season a year ago. And Rasul Douglas, who was a cast-off nobody, couldn't make it in the NFL, was on like 4 teams before the Packers claimed him or signed him off the practice squad of the Cardinals last year. And then he, of course, had a tremendous remainder of the year. So those 4, Preston, Lowry, Campbell, and Douglas, can't have a fallback where they go back to playing below average football. That would be a devastating turn of events for the Packers defense if any of them had that happen, much less if more than one did. Number 8, I think the Green Bay Packers are going to need a little bit more Brian Gutekunst magic. He's found different players in every single season that can come in the course of the year and affect this team. Last year was Rasul Douglas to a tremendous effect, but there have been the Jared Valdeers, there have been the Tramon Williams, there have been guys that he's been able to pick up at the end of the year that have found ways on this roster. And, some of the times they didn't need them, but even just bolstering depth. But I want to take that a step further. This is a 365-day a year, roster, building team that they're going to continue to find guys and churn the roster when they need to and those sort of things. I think Brian Gutekunst, for the real first time, needs to find a way to make an in-season splash. And we've seen this recently, right? We saw Odell Beckham go to the Rams a season ago, and I think his addition was really one of the main reasons that the Rams won a Super Bowl a season ago. And we're certainly the way they got there, and then his great start, and then before the injury in the Super Bowl. But I think Odell Beckham was a catalyst for the Rams last season. We saw the 49ers trade for Emmanuel Sanders. Now, they didn't win the Super Bowl, but they probably should have if Jimmy Garoppolo hits the pass downfield too. Emmanuel Sanders, and I think his addition is a real reason why they got to the Super Bowl in the first place. And I get here, right, that last year, who was the big player or on the trade deadline that everyone wanted? It was Stephon Gilmore. And the Packers didn't trade for him. The Panthers did. Gilmore did nothing for the Panthers. Instead, the Packers pick up Rasul Douglas, and he was phenomenal. So what would it have meant, right? Yeah, they gone out and got Stephon Gilmore. They probably would have been worse on defense. And, what does that ultimately lead to? That being said, I do think there is a psychological impact to bringing in an impact player midway through the season and feeling like, okay, this front office is going for it and they believe in us and this player is going to get us over the hump. And I do think there is a real legitimate psychological mindset that comes with that. So I would implore Brian Gutekunst to maybe be a bit more aggressive. There's going to be somebody that comes available. Go make that final move, because even if maybe it's not exactly the right guy at the right time, I think it can boost everyone else midseason where everything can get sort of monotonous in the middle of the year, especially towards the middle of the end, and bringing in that guy, whoever it is, whatever position they play, to just bring a little bit of a boost, a little bit of an energy, a little bit of an excitement, I think can be something that really helps this team and maybe, just maybe, helps propel the Packers over the top. Number 9, I think they need to face some real adversity. And it's interesting. I had this already planned and to talk about before Matt LaFleur's press conference on Wednesday. But he even said in his press conference on Wednesday, they haven't had to face a lot of adversity in his 3 seasons in Green Bay. Now, David Bakhtiari's injury, clearly one of those. But the only time they've even lost back-to-back games was last year when the Detroit game they didn't even really try to win. And then the 49er game. They have yet to lose back-to-back regular season games. They have not had anything under 13 wins in Matt LaFleur's 3 seasons. So they've sort of gone in a way on cruise control through the course of the regular seasons without facing really much adversity at all. Their playoffs, lives were never in question. I don't think, I'd have to go back and look, but I don't think over the last 3 years, really the NFC North was in much question. They've just consistently, been this NFC North juggernaut since Matt LaFleur has got here. And again, haven't lost back-to-back regular season games, 13 wins every year, no more than 4 losses, which was the 4 a season ago. And because of that, I think sometimes you fail to learn some of your weaknesses over the course of the season. You fail to have that Aaron Rodgers, what he calls the galvanizing moment, where everyone gets on the same page, looks themselves in the face and realizes, hey, you got to get better or we're going to end up being eliminated from this thing. And I think we've seen that from teams that have won the Super Bowl where they've had to go through some adversity, they've had to look themselves in the mirror, and they've had to find a way to get better and evolve come playoff time. And I think the Rams are a great example of that a season ago. The Packers crushed them in the regular season, and then the Rams go right basically through the NFC and win the Super Bowl. So I do think they need a little bit more adversity. Now, that's never fun, right? You don't want to see the Packers lose a bunch of games in the regular season or have some big issue that they have to overcome. But I think if they just go on cruise control through the regular season again, have no competition from the NFC North, win 13 more games, I don't know that they're going to learn anything from that. And I think that could ultimately be a problem. So I think they're not only going to have some adversity, but I think they're going to have to handle it, look themselves in the face, learn from it, and be better because of it. Number 10, I think the defensive front really needs to live up to the hype. I think guys like Jarran Reed and TJ Slayton really need to have those breakout seasons. Dean Lowry, as I mentioned earlier, cannot have a fall back to what he was in 19 and 20. Kenny Clark needs to look like Kenny Clark. Devontae Wyatt needs to come along as the course of the season goes on. Rashawn Gary needs to be an all-pro player, and Preston Smith needs to be a really good edge rusher. Because if those things are true, this defense is going to get after people. We saw it in practice against the Packers. We saw it in practice against the Saints. When that defensive front is cooking, they have all the ability in the world to wreck people, to get pressure, to stop the run. And I'll even throw in Quay Walker and Devondre Campbell in there as well, especially as Walker and Campbell, I think, are going to be used as blitzers, as run defenders, as just about everything. Coverage, they're do-it-all inside linebackers. So I think that defensive front has the ability to be really, really good. But if all of a sudden they eke towards average, I think that's going to change the outlook for this defense tremendously. So that defensive front really needs to live up to the hype. I mentioned number 11, the evolution of Matt LaFleur. And then number 12, last but not least, similar to yesterday in talking about Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers just needs to be Aaron Rodgers, right? No, all of a sudden some weird fall off, later in his career, or, doesn't have the same whatever, whether it's mobility or arm strength, or just doesn't play at the same level without Devontae Adams. If Aaron Rodgers is Aaron Rodgers, as mentioned the other day, they're going to have a puncher's chance at a Super Bowl and give them a real opportunity to go out and win. But he also needs to be Aaron Rodgers in the playoffs as well. And we haven't always seen that. We've seen MVP Rodgers in the regular season a lot. That MVP Rodgers hasn't shown up in the playoffs quite as much. I want to see him grab the playoffs by the throat and tell the playoffs, I own you. Not just the Bears, some crappy regular season franchise, since he's been in Green Bay for the most part. I want to see him do that and own the playoffs like he has the capability of doing and be the MVP of the playoffs in Super Bowl and not just the regular season. That is going to do it for me today. Just real quick recap. 12 keys to the Packers season: lack of injuries, offensive line performance, developing a playmaker, play better at the right time, respectable special teams, bounce back seasons from Savage, Crosby, Tunyon, and Garvin, no fall off seasons from Preston, Lowry, Campbell, or Douglas, a little bit of Brian Gutekunst's magic, learn how to handle adversity and handle some adversity over the course of the season and grow from it. Defensive front lives up to the hype. A late season evolution from Matt LaFleur, and Aaron Rodgers is Aaron Rodgers, the MVP, or at least the MVP caliber quarterback that we've seen over the course of the last couple seasons. Thanks so much for joining me today. Always appreciate it. I'll be right back here tomorrow with an all new episode. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.